So welcome everyone. We're going to wait a few moments for everyone to join us before doing the welcoming and the introductions and then starting the event. So in the meantime, I would say we have the chat function open today. So I would encourage people to introduce themselves in the chat and post links to relevant information yeah, just make good use of it. Okay, so let's make a start. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Rees and I am Head of Research and Policy at the Women's Budget Group. So we're a network of leading experts, academics, policymakers, and campaigners that analyze the impact of economic policy on women and strive for a more gender equal economy. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today and welcome to this meeting organized by the Women's Budget Group and the Coventry Women's Partnership to discuss and give some evidence on the impact of COVID-19 on women in Coventry. So we've got a great panel with us today. And in a minute, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. But first, I wanted to say something about the project that this meeting is a part of and also do a bit of housekeeping. So the report we're launching today is the final report on a series of research reports that we've been doing with the Coventry Women's Partnership. And this partnership brings together frontline women's organizations in Coventry who are working together to improve the lives of women in the city. So as part of this project, the Women's Budget Group has been working with the partners in the city, and I'm pleased to say that we've got some of them on the panel today. And we've been doing research and writing a series of reports about the issues that our partners and the women that they work with identify as important. So in previous reports, we have covered poverty, funding for the women's sector, housing, and also specific challenges that migrant women face. So my colleague Hannah will include the links to these reports on the chat, so feel free to consult them if you want. And I also like to mention that this project is possible thanks to the generous support from the Smallwood Trust. So the report we're launching today, it looks at the impact of COVID-19 crisis on women in Coventry. And it takes an economic perspective, but also we're looking at other aspects such as health, access to support services, etc. So I'll leave Anna to talk about the findings of the report in a moment. But first, I would like to do some basic housekeeping. So in terms of structure, what we're going to have today is a presentation at the beginning on the findings of the report. Then we will have a brief exposition by Zara on how this crisis is impacting her women constituents, and then a discussion with frontline organizations in the city about the consequences that COVID-19 has brought to the women that they support. So there will be some time for questions, hopefully at the end. So I encourage people to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A function. So during the event, if you have any questions, please drop them there. And then at the end, we can pick some questions for the panelists. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a chat function and we encourage people to introduce themselves, talk to each other, post links to other research or information that might be useful. WBG staff are monitoring the chat, so I will please ask participants to be civil and respectful in your interactions. And today we will finish at 5:30. So without further ado, I would like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and their organization. So please keep it to one line, very brief, and then we can hear more about what you are doing during the discussion shortly. So I'm going to go via how people are presented in my screen. So Anne.
Good afternoon, I'm Anne White from Coventry Law Centre, and I work on the Coventry Women's Partnership project.
Thank you, Anna. Anna.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm a research assistant at the Women's Budget Group, and I'm an author on this report.
Thank you. Zara.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zara Sultana, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Coventry South.
Thank you very much, Zara. Faye.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Faye Pettit. I'm with FWT, Fellows of Women's Training, and I'm the Partnership Connector for Coventry Women's Plan.
Thank you, Faye. Michelle and Adele.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle McHugh. I'm the CEO of Kairos Women Working Together.
I'm Adele Canterbury, and I'm Service Manager for Kairos.
Thank you very much. So that's everyone. And I would now like to give the floor to Anna, who will give a brief presentation of the findings of the report. Okay. Can you see my screen, Anna? Okay. You're on mute, Anna. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. I just quickly wanted to draw people's attention to the QR code on the bottom left hand of the screen. If you point your camera, the camera on your phone up to the code, it should pop up with a link in the web browser which takes you to the report, just in case you wanted to read along alongside the discussions. So by now, we know that COVID-19 is a global public health crisis. At the time of writing the report, there were 269 confirmed deaths in Coventry. We know the majority of serious cases have been higher for men. But it's also triggered an unparalleled socioeconomic crisis, which has worsened many pre-existing inequalities for women. And this forms the focus of the report. This is the final report in a series from the Coventry Women's Partnership, which is a collaboration between the Women's Budget Group and 5 specialist organisations in Coventry who support vulnerable women. So a big thank you to all the partners for their valuable input, and it's great to have some here today. And a huge thanks also, as Sarah mentioned, to our funders at Smallwood Trust for funding the partnership and the research. So just to give a brief summary of the research process, we used Coventry as a field site to conduct desk research to collect UK-wide, West Midlands and Coventry-specific data to highlight the impact of COVID-19 on women at the national, regional and city level. We also used polling that we did in partnership with Fawcett Society, Queen Mary University and the London School of Economics, as well as drawing heavily from some interviews we conducted with representatives from a broad range of services, including Coventry City Council, Independent Debt Advice Services and union reps. And I know some are watching today, so thank you to everyone that took the time to speak with us. The report covers a broad range of the gendered effects and intersecting inequalities exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis across health and social care, employment, social security, education, and childcare. There's too much in the report to cover everything today, so today I'd like to focus on the impact on families, employment, and frontline women's services. We know that people with children are often harder hit economically when crises happen than those without. With schools and nurseries still partially closed and social distancing rules preventing support from extended family and friends, childcare has shifted almost entirely to the immediate household. Now, mothers and fathers in heterosexual couples, which was the focus of much of the research in this area, have both been doing more childcare than before the crisis, totaling the equivalent of an extra working week between them, as I'm sure many people on this call will have experienced. Now, fathers are engaging in more childcare than they did before the crisis. However, mothers are still doing on average 50% more or 2 hours more a day. As people return to work, the situation is looking pretty challenging for those with young children, as there are likely to be significant closures in the formal childcare sector, with more than 25% rising to 35% in disadvantaged areas, or upwards of 10,000 nurseries expected to permanently close within the next year. As many regions, including the West Midlands, face significant shortages, competition for places will increase, possibly also causing prices to rise. And we did some calculations for the report on the cost of childcare in the West Midlands and found that a nursery place for a child under 3 already costs between 44% and 61% of a woman's annual salary. Alongside this, since the start of the crisis, mothers have lost their jobs, had hours cut, or been furloughed at a higher rate than fathers. Before the crisis, mothers were also in paid work 80% of the rate that fathers were, but that's sadly now dropped to 70%. So our concern is that as the country opens up and parents are expected to return to work without adequate childcare in place, this is going to force two-parent households to elect a parent to stay at home and look after the children. Because, as I've just mentioned, mothers tend to earn less than fathers, and this crisis only seems to have widened the gap, we think it's highly likely that the responsibility of staying at home will be falling mostly to mothers. Aside from childcare, the crisis has led to many families experiencing increased financial difficulties. The West Midlands already had the highest rate of child poverty in the UK at 23.3%. And our research has found that even more families are being pushed into food poverty, with food bank usage in Coventry having doubled since the start of the crisis. This mirrors the national picture, with a shocking 38% of people across the UK struggling to pay their bills and 1 in 10 having to use a credit card to buy essential food items. And many of the people we interviewed for the report were particularly concerned around growing personal debt and the likely increase in insolvency debt relief orders as the economic crisis deepens. Many mothers from minority groups are being particularly impacted by falls in income and financial insecurity, and worryingly, a quarter of BAME mothers and a third of disabled mothers are struggling to feed their children. Sadly, 42% of single families, almost 90% of which are headed by women, are also anticipating living on less than £500 a month in the coming months. Now, unsurprisingly, this has caused a huge strain on people's mental health, with 1 in 3 women jumping to 40% of mothers of younger children having reported feeling highly anxious since the start of the crisis. So in broadening out from looking at families to the overall landscape of women's employment, we know that women make up the majority of those in many key sectors, and this is certainly reflected in the West Midlands, where women are 3 times more likely than men to work in health and social care, teaching and education, and 20 times more likely to work in childcare. But women are also the majority of workers in shutdown sectors, being 3 times more likely than men to work in leisure and travel, and twice as likely to work in retail. And young women have been particularly affected, as they were the majority of workers in sectors like hospitality and non-food retail, which are only just beginning to reopen. And we've seen today from several national retail companies that many are expecting significant job losses. The crisis has seen 26% of women anticipate a fall in income, compared with only 18% of men, with young women, parents, minority groups, and those in insecure work most impacted by income decreases. In Coventry, we know that on average, women already earned nearly £10,000 less a year than men, and so were already in a less secure financial position. BAME women are particularly affected by a drop in income and are already more likely to be in low-paid work. So the worry is that the gender pay gap will continue to grow in the coming months, reversing decades of progress towards increasing gender equality in the workplace. So the precarity of women's employment, increased debt, and mental health issues have led to increased demand for support services. And we know that unfortunately, violence against women and girls has also increased significantly during the crisis. Women's frontline services have been working tirelessly to meet growing demand during this volatile time, whilst also having to completely change the way they deliver their support. The sector has been consistently underfunded over the past 10 years, and the effects of this will be acutely felt as lockdown eases, when there's likely to be a spike in demand for support, and we'll hear more about the impacts on the sector from our partners a bit later on. So looking forward, whilst the Chancellor's summer statement yesterday brought welcome investment to address youth unemployment and create green jobs, the measures do little to support victims of domestic violence, NHS and social care staff, people with disabilities and low-income families, and also fail to address the looming childcare crisis. As well as this report, the Women's Budget Group has just released a briefing on our case for a care-led recovery, which would see large-scale investment in childcare and social care jobs and training, paying workers a decent wage and ensuring high-quality care for all. Investing in a care-led recovery is greener, creates almost 3 times more jobs than the equivalent in construction, and reduces the gender employment pay gap. And on the final slide, I've included the QR code on the bottom right hand of the screen, if you can see that, with the green outline in case you'd like to read the briefing. We've also launched a commission on the gender equal economy, which is an expert-led project working to proactively develop alternative economic policies to promote gender equality across the UK. And we'll see its final report published this autumn. So overall, this report paints a broad picture of the intersecting inequalities experienced by many different groups of women in Coventry and around the UK. And we hope that by addressing these and making timely recommendations, that this report will contribute to policy discussions on how to build back better using a gender-sensitive approach following the crisis.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this presentation of the report's findings. I think, as we've seen, there are quite a few things happening in Coventry that are mirrored across the country. But now I would like to move us on to a discussion and sort of an exposition of what women are facing in Coventry at the moment. So I would invite now Zara to give us an account of what she is seeing with her women constituents at the moment.
Of course, thank you, Sarah. Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me speak here today, and thank you to the Women's Budget Group and Coventry Women's Partnership for producing this really important and really stark report. When the pandemic first broke out, it was frequently said that we're all in this together and that the virus was a great leveler. But as it's gone on, we've seen just how false that is. And this report really does make shocking reading on how hard women are being affected by the impact of coronavirus. We've learned that women are more likely to work in sectors that have been closed down and are going to be slower to reopen, like hospitality and travel, and these jobs are now more at risk. And what the report details very much corresponds with what women in Coventry South have been getting in touch with me about. In the early months of the pandemic, we had batches of cases from families with children and 2 self-employed parents who missed out on financial assistance from the government for a very large part of the lockdown. Through casework, I read telling stories of self-employed women entrepreneurs who had never paid themselves a wage so they could grow their young businesses to employ several other skilled women. For many in this situation, business disruption happened just as their trade got to the point that they could enjoy their first salary for themselves, as well as covering the basic needs of their families and their children. As time went by, disruption spread to the wider economy and more women came forward saying that they were struggling to make ends meet. There have been many key public sector workers who, affected by many years of austerity and privatization in healthcare and education, lost out on support in the early days when work agencies refused to furlough staff. We then saw an uptick in the number of families whose letters demonstrated the stigma around applying for benefits like universal credit and the hardening of gender roles and norms following the loss of work. And something else, just got insects flying at me. And something else we've seen is how more vulnerable women have been hit the hardest, with effects on migrant women, young mothers, and single mothers being particularly affected. The case of migrant women has been especially affected by surface level suspension of no recourse to public funds, while the hostile environment has continued to take its toll. For example, I've had reports of women and mothers with newborn children settling to sleep on friends' sofas throughout the pandemic because housing for them was not found fast enough before the start of lockdown. I've also had cases of women reluctant to visit the GP or the NHS because of understandable fears of being reported to the Home Office. This has meant that the combined effect of coronavirus and the hostile environment has had serious consequences on women's health. In normal times, this is horribly unfair, but during a pandemic, it's an outrageous public health issue. Similarly, the intersection between coronavirus and the housing crisis has meant that single mothers and women with caring responsibilities for children and vulnerable family members have found themselves in sharp competition with other people in need of social housing. Throughout lockdown, the need for a house where one can take care of their loved ones has shot up, while all systems to find housing have slowed down. This has left women in Coventry with a difficult choice between bidding for social housing and feeling like they are putting their loved ones at risk by seeking an income from precarious agency work in the care sector, where we have seen a national scandal unfold affecting both patients and carers. And a clear example of where an industry with more women workers affected has been the aviation industry. The restructuring at British Airways, triggered by coronavirus, has been brought to my attention, and several stories of cabin crew members with decades of service are facing compulsory redundancies. These are traditional stories of trade union resistance and campaigning against job losses led by women in my own union, Unite. These women are long-standing union members who are bringing all of their experience and expertise to bear on this fight because they see what is at stake. Decently paid jobs where the union has been able to make a difference in concretely improving terms and conditions at work. It's these jobs, as well as precarious jobs, that are under threat in the present crisis. So this is just a little snapshot of what we've seen in casework. And while fairly anecdotal, it very much corresponds with what the report finds. But there have also been some inspiring responses to this crisis in Coventry too. And one that I'm particularly proud of is the work of CARAG, which is a migrant-run organisation who has been supporting asylum seekers and refugees throughout the crisis. And in particular, there's a project led by Last Mafuba, an inspiring woman who is cooking and delivering meals for people who have no recourse to public funds. CARAG and many other groups have stepped into the breach and filled it in support, which really should have been carried out by the government. And as we look to what happens next, this report has some really important recommendations. We can't go back to the old normal. We can't go back to business as usual. We have to do things differently, providing support to everyone who needs it, tackling gender inequalities, racial inequalities, and class inequalities at a really systemic level, not just tweaking things around the edges. So the report's recommendations for the government to invest in the sector to help lead the recovery should absolutely be taken on board. Not only could it help fix the broken social care system, but also tackle the gender employment gap, stimulate employment, and lift us all out of recession. And really, this is central to what our approach should be going forward. Building an economy and a society that puts care for one another at its heart. That's certainly something I'm going to fight for in Parliament. And thank you for having me speak, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Zara, for this, in some cases, harrowing account of what you are seeing in Coventry, but also to ending on a more positive note of what can be done. So I would now move us on to the discussion with the partner organizations in Coventry. So they're doing a brilliant job in supporting women in these unprecedented and very difficult circumstances. So I would start by asking, what are some of the main issues that are facing women that you are seeing in the cases that you support? And I'm thinking in particular things like debt and housing, financial instability. So all these things have already been touched on by Zara. And are there any particular groups of women that you are seeing hardest hit by this crisis? So I would start with Anne, perhaps.
Good afternoon, everyone. The referrals we've received at the Law Centre as part of the partnership since lockdown have increased overall. Initially, we did experience a decrease in demand for around 2 weeks at the beginning of lockdown. I think that was pretty much, people recognised that. But we've now received more referrals in the last 3.5 months in lockdown than we saw in the previous 6 months before lockdown began. The referrals have been for family law, immigration advice, housing advice have been the main areas where specialist advice has been needed. Most of the referrals we received for family law have been around contact orders for children and non-molestation orders and injunctions. Many women we have seen have got complex inquiries where there are several areas of law which overlap and women needing advice on all of them. Benefit inquiries, council tax debt, money worries, benefit underclaiming, especially around disability benefits. And although many systems had been changed for lockdown, sanctions on hold, courts not being open for evictions, deductions not going through for benefits, and support for council tax, people still need advice because the issues hadn't gone away. They'd just been put on a temporary hold. We've also seen a large increase in referrals for employment advice, and as a law centre we introduced an employment helpline so that everyone and women that we see have access to up-to-date employment law information, and that information's on our website. We've also seen families that have experienced loss during the lockdown and have lost members of their family to this illness. And with funerals being so costly, the average family struggling to find the £3,500 to £4,000 to bury a loved one, it has made what is already an awful situation even worse by them not having those funds. And it's been quite challenging for us as advisors to get that help for families. And although there are lots of grants out there and support, very often it doesn't come anywhere near to covering the cost of that funeral. And although there has been a recent increase in the funeral grants, so that was specific during lockdown that's happened. But there's also been evictions from temporary accommodations, which people weren't expecting. We've had a few instances where we've had families that are being evicted during lockdown and asked to leave the temporary accommodation, where the local authority no longer have a duty to house, which is lawful and correct. But it meant that those families, which often can't afford private rented accommodation, have then struggled to find somewhere to go. And navigating this system is always very difficult during any time, but in lockdown it's become even harder. But they've been able to still get the support and advice around specialist housing law. So these are just some of the issues we're seeing. The groups of women that we've seen for Coventry Women's Partnership have identified themselves. The largest groups are white European, black African and white British. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Faye, the same question. What sort of issues are you seeing at the moment affecting women that you support?
Thank you, Sarah. So through FWT, we've been working with our existing service users and engaging with new referrals. And just to reiterate what Anne touched on, women through the COVID-19 crisis and through lockdown are presenting with multiple support needs. They're quite, more often than not, very complex cases and circumstances. We've certainly seen women struggling to access information appropriately. A large number of our service users through FWT are BAME women, migrant women, newly arrived women, and they have needed a lot of support in a culturally sensitive way from our teams, in a language supported way, to help understand the guidelines and understand what's happening in their community. And we're seeing those complexities again as we're coming out of lockdown to help women appropriately access information as guidelines change. Women have certainly been impacted with the demand in the home, with having children at home. We have many families that have numerous children, maybe 3, 4, 5 children, and even though there may be males in the household that have been home more than they normally would, the vast majority of that care still sits with women. Women have talked about a huge level of pressure and stress in trying to engage their children with learning, communicate with the schools, and there was a real assumption quite early on that children had an accessible space to log on in front of a screen and engage in learning activities, where lots of our service users don't have access to the internet. They may have one smartphone that they have a data allowance on, but they certainly don't have technology to support structured learning with numerous children in the property. We've had women talk quite frankly about their distress and how the impact on their mental health and well-being at this time, and worrying about their capacity in their parenting. And we've had women that have tried to access support for their mental health, but they feel that support has been moved onto phone-based, that they're not understood, that their language needs can't be met appropriately. And again, there's been a digital assumption when maybe they've been advised to download apps or use chatbot functions on web pages or exchange emails, and they don't have that digital literacy, that they don't have those IT skills, and they don't have again, it's not supported in a language appropriate way. And to reiterate some of Anne's points around financial insecurity, we've had so many women talking about a concern of increased debt, whether that's consumer debt. They're concerned that their partner in the household has maybe taken on loans but isn't both of their names, or they don't know who these funders are. They may be risky lenders, they may be incredibly high interest rates. And there's been financial protections in place during this time to help tide families over, such as utility companies negotiating payments and landlords negotiating payments, and some consumer debts providers negotiating payments. But all those provisions will come to an end, so the debt will still be there, and women will still be faced with trying to manage that debt in their household. And many of our women are benefit claimants, but it still hasn't stretched to cover their household during this time, particularly if there has been a working member in the household, but their working patterns have changed. Their children at home all the time, that there's more food being consumed, there's more energy being consumed. It all adds up to financial insecurity. And again, as we come out of lockdown, there's further financial security is such a concern, and something that women communicate with us a lot. And on the other side of women in a very busy household with many members of their family, we also have women who are alone and have been alone through the whole of lockdown. They may be self-shielding, they may be in temporary small accommodation, and again, their mental health has completely deteriorated. It's been a very, very distressing and lonely time.
Thank you very much, Faye. Michelle and Adele, would you like to let us know a bit more about what the women that you support are facing now with the lockdown and COVID-19?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Kairos is an organisation that supports women who are caught up in on-street prostitution in Coventry or are at risk of sexual exploitation. So I'll hand over to Adele, who's our service manager for the Aspire side of our service, which supports women who are involved in on-street prostitution. So Adele will talk about the impact of the women, and then I'll talk about the impacts in terms of the organisation.
Okay, so for us, COVID-19 and lockdown created a slightly different scenario, because for once, we had services becoming flexible. Things suddenly you didn't have to attend appointments and engage, and you weren't sanctioned or locked out of a service because of that. So for us, that was really good, along with the initiative of everybody in. We've got a lot of rough sleeping women, so for us there were some benefits. But of course, the concern is that as services now, as we're seeing, they're reverting back to normal, whilst the women have sort of fared relatively well throughout that lockdown period, now we're seeing sanctions coming back in. Again, we need this flexibility needs to stay in place if you want to help women with multiple complex needs. It just isn't going to work. And we have seen through lockdown, it can work that way. We just need the will to do it. And we need services to think, right, hello, how can we help this person? We see you. We don't need you to tick the box. We can work with you if you show us your need. Again, like I think Faye said, a lot of our service users, they have no access to internet or devices that can even surf the net, and they don't have the skills either to use those devices. There may be much younger females who you would anticipate the younger generation in general we think of in society can all access the, we'll talk about the gadgetry, but the service users we work with are so marginalised that that will not be their experience. And you know, they're using a little basic phone, again, across the services we work with, such as drug recovery services, ourselves, Rough Sleeper. There's been some really good collaborative work. We've been handing out phones. Our women regularly lose a phone or it's taken from them, because even a phone with £5 credit on it is a value. Everything has a value for the women we work with. So again, to actually have our women contactable has been marvellous. And again, we had some streams of funding come in that has meant that we can do this, but we as a very small charity, working with such large numbers, we couldn't have maintained the amount of phones that we've needed and credit that we've needed. We've had to keep ringing our CEO, can I pay for a taxi to get this person here? You know, we wouldn't normally be doing those things, and we wouldn't normally have had those streams of funds available. But that is what the initial points of COVID has brought for us. That said, like, I can't say enough that our fear is now that as we're reverting back to normal, the sanctions are coming in, we're already trying to send out signals. You need to get now your sick notes in, your GP is no longer going to phone, you're not going to be able to ring up and request or a sick note. These are all our women can't even usually engage with benefit system on a basic level. To confirm identity, our people have no ID. They don't have, when you say to somebody, well, you must have something. No, you will not have something if you've been living in a bush in Hillfield. You will not have a birth certificate or a benefit awards letter. And to other people, they're shocked by that. So we are talking about whole actual array of documentation that we'll need and work on a level that you cannot imagine, just to do the very basic things like claim benefit, get yourself a sick note, keep going with that, engage with the services that say, oh no, you had an appointment, you didn't attend that point. You know, that is our sort of concern as we come out of lockdown. Again, I work with people in prisons, and the prisons are still on a 24/7 lockdown. Of course, we're looking to resettle people and try to gain more positive outcomes for the women coming in and out of custody. A lot of our women are locked in the revolving door of prison, the cycle that they can't engage with probation, and that's them straight back in again. That we're not talking about people with large criminalities. It will be usually petty crime, shoplifting, things to keep themselves surviving. But you know, as they come out of prison, that's the one time they've had some headspace, they'll have got themselves on a medicated script. And for us, that's usually when we go in and we can get some results if we work intensely with a woman. At the moment, their lockdown situation, they're even greater isolated, even further removed. They're concerned coming out into society. They know that things are different. That people are wearing masks everywhere they go. What can they do? You know, how do they contact me? I would normally support on the day. I've had housing teams when I've emailed in and say, oh, this person's coming out tomorrow. This actually happened yesterday. This person's coming out tomorrow. Are you aware of it? And the email back was, yes, we tried to ring them, but they didn't answer. Now, I'm sorry, you cannot ring into a prison and speak to a person on a 24-hour lockdown. There isn't the staff in the prisons either. You know, they do have phones in the cell, so just to make that point, they can't receive calls in, and they can only ring out to people that have been approved for their call list. Housing wouldn't be approved because it can be an individual, only an individual. I'm approved for my service within the prison ring. They can't ring up a housing team. So they can't do anything for the housing application until they come out of prison. If you come out of prison and you're not used to an organised, conformed life, you aren't going to think, I know, I'll go and find a support worker who will let me access a phone. By the time you've travelled back to Coventry, and also you're going to have that excitement of release and your freedom is back, your free will is back. You are not going to start to prioritise need like the rest of us in society when we're functioning and engaging. So how do they even get housed? If you're not housed, the cycle will begin again. So again, my fear is that that system has still been left pretty much up in the air, that there isn't anything in place for those women. We've also seen an increase in rape amongst our women. We hear rape a lot. We're on a level, unfortunately, we're a little bit desensitised to to the word rape, and we hear all sorts of stories. But just to give you an idea of numbers, which has shocked us and has, you know, there hasn't been a member of this team who hasn't been traumatised himself. We've had 10 women report rape. 2 of those 10 have reported multiple rapes, and each story has been particularly violent. And the services then that would then cater for them are not accessible. You've got to go to places to have DNA taken if you want that. Maybe you might need prep from sexual health, or you might need to go to A&E. You know, I had to take someone to A&E, and we were there till 9 o'clock at night. And initially I'd been passed from, oh no, Coventry's closed, you need to go to rugby. I phoned rugby were like, no, she can't come here, we don't have prescribing people. And this is just a woman that's just been raped, trying to get herself protection from HIV and a morning after pill. You know, and luckily she was engaged with me, so I could do all that. But if this was a woman on the streets, or a woman who's in accommodation but isn't linked in with me, then she isn't going to be able to protect herself like that. She'd have just dealt with that. Mental health for us, again, has been a massive concern. We have definitely seen poor mental health effects on the women. We've seen an increase in drinking. There was concerns that we'd see in increased drug overdoses. We didn't actually see that, but we've definitely seen increased alcohol consumption, which has created different kind of chaos. Again, everything with the women has a price, and we have seen, and we don't usually see aggression amongst the women. There is a cohesion and support that has fell to pieces. You know, again, lots and lots of this person's attacked this person has been aggressive, and it's just been so jumbled up that you can't even work out who is the aggressor. But I think that is the sign of the poverty that people, you know, we're talking about people so marginalised, they're standing right outside of the COVID. That's not to say they're any more or any less, it's the fact that, please, you know, they're not to be forgotten, and they are just as relevant, and they need to be invested in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this, Adele and Michelle, and for also talking about a group of women that have been very often left out of the narratives of the impact of COVID-19 on women in particular. So I would now move on to a question about what sort of impacts are you now seeing on women as we move out of lockdown, so as lockdown eases, so Adele has already touched a bit on this, about the need to not go back to normal in how we used to do things, in not kicking people out on the streets again after a very successfully housing everyone sleeping rough. So Anne, would you like to say a few things about this? And I would ask people to keep their answers brief, so that we can go through all the questions and have some time for Q&A.
I mean, this question feeds into pretty much what Adele has just really covered about how we can't go back, and about things being lifted. How things were already bad before lockdown. We've had a temporary freeze on everything, and now, you know, with the sanctions and everything else, it's just going to be even harder about getting the right advice at the right time, getting to see the right people, having access to maybe some agencies that aren't around for people at the moment because of COVID, so that we have to think about that. But mainly for the women that I've been seeing and the families that we've been seeing, I think it's going to be about homelessness, childcare, job retentions after lockdown, and a big one, ensuring women experiencing violence and domestic violence that they've got somewhere to go now. You know, that there is availability for them to be housed when they need to leave, for now and post lockdown. And getting timely advice and prevention, so that we can stop things getting worse.
Zara, would you like to expand on any of the issues that you touched on in your brief presentation as we move out of the lockdown, some things that are already becoming sort of apparent on women's lives?
So I would just add to everything that's been said, which has been really powerful, is that where the government has issued support, there have been so many people who have fallen through the cracks. We saw an evictions ban, but we didn't see a rent freeze. And we know that when that, in a couple of months, we're going to see the housing system, which is already in crisis, explode essentially. So I think there needs to be real conversations around how we're housing people, and how easy it is for people who are renters rather than people who are mortgage owner, landlords, or people who have a mortgage. I would also add that, when it comes to the self-employed, which is a lot of casework that I've had, there are 3 million people, a lot of freelancers, but also people who have been paying tax and have been part of the system, just not being supported. So those are some of the cases, but I would say crucially, we need to look at the way our immigration system works and the way we look at refugees, the way we look at asylum seekers, how they are excluded from public funds, but also being able to get basic healthcare, and the situations that forces those people in. So dismantling the hostile environment has to be crucially at the top of the political agenda.
Thank you very much, Zara. Faye, would you like to add anything to what you're seeing as lockdown eases?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to highlight how recently, since lockdown has eased, I've had a number of women who have reached out for support around domestic abuse. There's one, I'll give a really brief example of one client, so it really touches on Sarah's point about a hostile environment, in that she has experienced years of abuse from her husband, and the abuse escalated during lockdown. As lockdown eased, her husband was re-engaging back into work, so he was leaving the property, and she used the opportunity to reach out for support. Fortunately, she was first partnership, and partner Coventry Havens Women's Aid are now actively working with her. But she's had her immigration status used as a weapon against her, as a tool against her. Her perpetrator has used it as a threat ever since their engagement, and she doesn't know what her immigration status is. She doesn't have access to information, can't physically find it, can't access documentation or her passport. She's always been told, you'll be destitute, no one will help you, you'll be told to leave the country. She may have a secure status, we don't know. And she reached crisis point. She's engaged in support through Coventry Haven. They have a safe window where they can contact her and engage with her. But she's still frozen in that fear. Like, now help is possibly there, even though she's been reassured that she can access legal advice, immigration legal advice, that Coventry Haven will help her, that the law centre will help her, that the partnership will help her wherever we can. You can just see she's frozen in fear. And I do think that partner is not just the coercive control she's experienced from her husband, alongside all the other abuse she's experienced, but she's living in a country that actively has a hostile environment against her. And similarly, I have a service user who's a woman who has no recourse to public funds and no right to work. So she's destitute, she has no access to her own income. She's living at goodwill of a friend, she lives in a friend's property. She was due to have a significant hearing in April, and that was going to get her closer to a conclusion. Her case has been with the Home Office, her asylum case has been with the Home Office for nearly 12 years. And that hearing in April was cancelled. It was postponed indefinitely. She wasn't given an alternative for it to be virtual or to engage with it in a different way. And that anguish has absolutely floored her mental health, to be nearly getting somewhere and then to not be given a date. And now, as we're easing out of lockdown, her immigration solicitor is really actively trying to find out more information, but still can't provide her with a date, to provide her with any reassurance. So we don't know how long it's going to be now. And she's experienced gender-based violence ever since she was a child. And the experience of having that date taken away and the physical confinements of lockdown, increased anxiety, mental anguish has meant that she's really experiencing past trauma. It's triggered real traumatic, and that's her lived experience. And that's 2 women that I've given a really brief overview of in Coventry. Coventry Women's Partnership is 5 frontline organisations. We work with hundreds and hundreds of women who have individual circumstances and they need to be seen as an individual. And they're presenting with quite often complex needs, and they face discrimination, inequality anyway, and it's just been a process. Sorry, I'm going off on one. Carry on.
Thank you very much, Faye. Adele and Michelle, I don't know if you've already expanded quite a bit on the issues that the women that you support are facing as lockdown disease, including the housing worries and concerns. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this? I
think just quickly, just to support what Adele said earlier, the biggest thing for us is coming out of lockdown. And as other services resume normal practice, actually that normal practice is a system that's broken and doesn't work in a gender or trauma-informed way. So for us, there's going to be a real big demand on our services, not in terms of the increase in numbers of women, but the same number of women requiring intensive support at the same point in time.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think as we've seen, the organizations, the civil society organizations and other support services in the city have been fundamental in ensuring that women and people in general have some sort of support during these unprecedented circumstances in this very difficult time. So my next question is about what are your hopes and concerns for the future of the women's sector as we come out of lockdown, and also knowing about the long-standing issues, the underfunding of the sector and the undervaluing of the sector as well. So your hopes and fears about the future of the women's sector in the city. I would start now with Faye.
Thank you. So one of our concerns is the increased demand on services, so increased demand on the women's sector in Coventry. Women may be reaching out for help now that restrictions are being lifted, but we're more likely to be seeing women as they're closer to crisis point or at point of crisis. Their needs are more likely to be complex, and they're more likely to be further in debt, pushed further into poverty, more likely to be at risk of unemployment if they're not already unemployed, if they've experienced job losses, and they're more likely to be presenting with ill mental health, that they've had a deterioration in their mental health and well-being. A hope on the side of that is that we will be able to engage and support those women, and once their immediate needs have been met, that we can offer them ongoing transitions and support across the partnership that they may have not considered anymore, so that they may be more of a pathway for women once they do initially present with support needs. We need existing funders and commissioners to consider the women's sector for everything it is and everything it achieves, and obviously hope would be to have more access to funding and ring-fence funding for specialist organisations that work with particular groups in society and particular women in society. I think I'll leave my points there because I'm sure other partners will add into that.
Thank you very much, Faye. Anne, do you have anything to add to the hopes and futures for the civil society sector or voluntary sector?
I think Faye's pretty much wrapped that one up. But my concerns would be, like Faye was saying, that the sector, if it receives cuts at a time where people are going to really need us, and really need that help and support and that individual skills that comes from different partners to be for women to access. So I would hope to continue that we're able to continue to work with each other, and that women can get that support and access to their rights, because we need that in place so the demand can be met after lockdown.
Thank you very much, Anne. Michelle and Adele, what would be your hopes and futures for the women's sector going forward in Coventry?
So, okay, our hope will be quite easy to come up with. We hope that this flexibility that we've seen, this way of working, that we know now it is possible. I've never thought I'd praise a Tory government, but that's where they'll get praise, because they did become flexible, and they could work with people in a different way. And we really couldn't stress the importance of a gender and trauma-informed way of working for women. Our concern is obviously that at some point we are going to have to pay, and then revert back, if not worse, to what we've seen prior to lockdown, and it is going to hit those in the lower socioeconomic statuses much harder, especially our women, and that would be our concern. The collaborative working, the strengthen the female voice that we get from Coventry Women's Partnership, having the support of the Law Centre on board is invaluable as well. You know, for once, you know, we can get such a marginalised group of women heard, and that you'd like to see things like that funded. It's a fear that, you know, streams of funding will disappear, but, you know, big up Smallwood Trust for that. And then again, can't say enough how much we'd like to see the voices of women in positions of power, influencing change, influencing, just like the MP said at the beginning there, Sarah, you know, a caring society, like, you know, I'm not saying just women can do it, but you will get that balance the more women you get, and that is what we'd hope from it.
I think just to add to that, I think one of my hopes is that the women's sector as a whole has a more established voice, and we have a stronger voice and a stronger partner and player around the table to bring about change. As Ella and I were having a conversation earlier, and she said to me, you know, previously we've been dismissed as raving feminists and not taken seriously, and I think now there is a real tendency to listen to women's sector organisations and to understand there is a need to work in a gender and trauma-informed way.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Adele, and also for that final note of optimism. Zara, I don't know if you have anything to add to your hopes and futures for the women's sector, and as a sort of a segue into the next question, which will be, what should the government be doing to mitigate this impact on women in Coventry?
Don't want to repeat the contributions just made. I think some of my biggest concerns are what happens after October. There's around 83,000 people in the West Midlands who are on furlough, and there could be a jobs loss tsunami. And we know how that would impact women, and how that, you know, unemployment disproportionately affects women, and just what that would do to our society, where we've seen a decade of cuts and a deep recession is potentially on the horizon. Also, with the increase of demand on the women's sector, there needs to be more than appreciation. There needs to be a long-term commitment to funding, not just empty talk, not just rhetoric, but a genuine investment in the work that's being done. So going forward, I would strongly, use my position to champion the recommendations in the report around a care-led recovery that would bring huge benefits. I personally was elected on a manifesto that promised quality care for all through a national care service, and the report talks a lot about social care, and the manifesto that I was elected on promised free personal care for the elderly, supporting people with disabilities to live independently, and providing personal care. care, and that's what I would champion. Also support for low paid workers, disproportionately women. So a big increase in the national minimum wage, putting an end to 0 hours contracts which exploit people, and ensuring that there's a decent level of statutory sick pay for everyone, because at the moment not everyone is covered if you're on a 0 hours contract, and so forth. And then just some final points about how we've seen a spike in domestic violence through lockdown. And of course, we won't have the accurate figures because of reporting or under-reporting at the moment. And that reminds us what an absolute scandal it is that women's refugees have been defunded over the last 10 years. So we need to crucially put money back in places where it matters, including women's refugees, and supporting the women on the margins of society. So again, ending the hostile environment and ending no recourse to public funds. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I would encourage participants to drop your questions on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, as we will soon be going into the Q&A part of the event. And so on this last point about what you would like to see government doing to support women in Coventry as we move out of lockdown, I would like to have everyone else's views on this. And I don't know if you would like to start.
Yeah, and again, all of what Sarah's just said, but you know, look at the benefit cap, the 2-child rule, timely payment of universal credit. I could go on. The benefit sanctions, affordable housing, refuge places for women, ensuring that cuts don't erode the voluntary sector any further, and that people actually, you know, places like Coventry Women's Partnership and all our partners are still around to be able to provide that advice and support, for which is going to be much needed. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Faye, would you like to add to what's been said?
Thank you. Certainly reiterate Anne's points, and to again discuss the importance of acknowledging long-term funding for the women's sector and ensuring that the women's sector is acknowledged and well funded. And something that's been discussed across Coventry Women's Partnership, and Michelle touched on it a little bit earlier about that, you know, we have more of a presence around the table, that within Coventry we need a local cabinet member for women who will work alongside us to actively support the commission and policy change in the women's sector in the city. That would be quite high up on the list, I think. I'll let you move on to this.
Thank you very much, Faye. Michelle and Adele, would you have something to add to this?
Yes, we'd like a system-wide holistic approach to early intervention and prevention for women with multiple and complex needs that is trauma and gender informed and is appropriately funded. So Kairos turns 21 years old this year, which is a massive achievement for a grassroots charity, but we don't want to be here in 21 years' time. We would have failed if we are still here. But to achieve that, we need a whole system transformation in terms of how we support women with complex needs. And just to add to what Faye said about having a local cabinet member for women's services, this isn't just about central government, it's about local government as well. And I would urge the City Council to appoint a women's commissioner to commission services for women that are joined up and holistic. We don't have to wait for central government.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for this, and to remind us the importance of the prevention side of these services, and how much you know, money, how much misery these services save when all this is added up. So we are now going to move on to some questions that people have been dropping on the Q&A function. So I think one question that has popped up, and I think would be particularly pertinent, since this is a report done in collaboration with the Coventry Women's Partnership, and the Coventry Women's Partnership has been quite a successful experiment in joining up services in the city to improve how support is delivered to women. So the question is how the importance of cooperation and collaboration between different women's organizations, between different specialist organizations, to get the funding and to get the perhaps more power in terms of advocating for the services that women need in the city. And I'm thinking particularly, Faye, you might be well placed to talk a little bit about the experience of the Coventry Women's Partnership and how that has changed the perhaps women's sector landscape in Coventry.
Yeah, absolutely. So Coventry Women's Partnership has really enabled it's enabled women accessing services to have their voices heard, in that Women's Budget Group as a partner and us doing more joint working has meant we've been really able to identify themes and needs of women across the city, and you've been able to work collaboratively to meet those needs. The ethos of having a seamless referral pathway has been so significant to women. So it means wherever women present in their journey, whether they're at a crisis point or whether they're presenting for something else, and then once you build a work relationship, maybe a disclosure happens further down the line, wherever they are with whatever organisation is, however they first come through the door, so to speak, they're seamless onward referrals, which means that we can meet needs in a timely way. But for a woman, it means that she's not necessarily presenting sensitive information over and over again. She's not repeating herself. She's not feeling that numerous professionals are ringing her at the same time, that something quite traumatic or complicated might be happening. And it means that we can also map out a woman's transition. So if her initial needs have been met, and she's in a place where she's safe or feeling more secure, we're able to support her to look further forward and where do you want to go next? What are her needs next? Is there something else that she wants to engage with? And it means that we have more lengthy engagement with women. And from a working perspective, like I'm based at FWT, but I have working relationships with frontline staff across all the organisations, and it really means that you can have an open dialogue about what's working, what's not working. It means that you can look at significant challenges in the city and be solution focused. And it means, just having a key point of contact at each organisation that works specifically on the project has been so valuable. It means that women can access advice from the Law Centre incredibly efficiently. It means that women that may first be working with Kairos can be further supported with Haven or with Crasac, and then maybe at some point in their journey they do something like confidence building with us at FWT. I mean, that's a whole pathway, and the value on that, the value on supporting women in a way where you see themselves in their individual circumstances. We've recently had a social return investment evaluation, and it's just been, I do believe it's been life-changing for some of the women that we've worked with, of how we've been able to look at them as an individual and address their circumstances across the organisations in a seamless way. I don't know if that answers.
Yes, that was really good. Thank you. I think it showed the good work that the partnership has been doing in Coventry, and how that has changed many women's lives as well for the better. And Michelle, I don't know if you would like to contribute to this question. So the importance of collaboration between voluntary organizations to deliver their services more efficiently?
Yeah, if I go first, Anne, if that's okay. I completely echo what Faye's just said in terms of the Coventry Women's Partnership. You know, like any effective partnership, we're stronger together than we are individually in terms of representing the women's sector in Coventry. I think, as I alluded to in my previous answers to some of the questions, supporting our service users, we recognise that if we are to support women with complex and multiple needs on a journey of recovery, we can't do that on our own. So it's not just a voluntary sector we need to work with, but it's statutory services. And during COVID, we saw some really effective collaborative work in between the voluntary sector and the statutory services, and we'd obviously like that to continue.
Thank you very much. Anne, would you have anything to add?
Just that obviously Central England Law Centre isn't a women only, so we were really proud to be part of Coventry Women's Partnership and asked to be part of it in the first place. But I think what it's taught us, like Faye and Michelle has just said, is, you know, we are stronger together. It has been really successful. We have helped a tremendous amount of women, and it's also for me anyway, personally, given me a greater understanding of everybody's roles, been able, I think, that to understand all the different individual things that are out there for women, and it's brought us all together to be able to make that seamless for them, and that's been a really good thing. But working collaboratively with statutory organisations has got to be the way forward.
Thanks very much, everyone. So another question that we've had, and I think you've all have already touched a bit on this, but it's about language skills and the difficulty or the added difficulties that exist in reaching out and supporting women who don't speak English during this difficult times. So do you have anything to add to this, what the experience has been of your individual organizations? Zara, I don't know if you also have anything to add in terms of your casework on this, but I'm opening the floor, so feel free to unmute yourselves and just, yeah, contribute.
I don't mind starting off in that. As I mentioned earlier, I think in the first question I talked about the difficulty in accessing guidance and advice, and a lot of assumption around digital literacy and a lack of understanding language support needs. At FWT we have a really diverse staff team, they're multilingual. I think I'm the only person that lets I don't speak another language. And if I didn't have those working relationships with colleagues where we can jointly work with women and try and find a solution for women, I still think women still would have struggled, because if we haven't been able to support their language needs or have staff that could advocate on their behalf in a culturally sensitive way, in a language appropriate way, I don't know where those women would have got that information from or where they would have got that support from. I don't know. So it just shows how vital having women's sector organisations that it can work across diverse communities is. And going forward, whether there could be investment in digital funding for the women's sector. I mean, when we do have sessions back at FWT, we've always ran IT sessions for women, and again, they're always delivered by very talented staff members who are multilingual. So it's always been a part of our work to support women with IT skills. Doesn't mean they have access to technology or internet at home, but it's somewhere they can go for things. And whether there could be further investment, particularly around digital literacy for women across certain communities or women with language support needs. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything to add to this point? Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. So there was a question about the if we had looked at the impact of this crisis in older women in particular. So we know that at least from the health point of view, there is a big sort of disproportionate impact on older people. We know also about some of the sort of pre-existing inequalities that older women in particular face in terms of pensioner poverty, low pensions, fuel poverty, etc. So has that been a particular issue? So have you supported older women in your casework, Zara?
Yeah, this has been especially women who have been unable to get their pensions when they were promised, the WASPy women. This has been casework that I've received ever since being elected, and the concerns in the casework were we are being forced into poverty and forced to work longer and really precarious and difficult situations, and while in the coronavirus pandemic, those issues are consistently the same. And of course, there's the added impact of older women facing loneliness, and when people are being told to shield and not being able to contact anyone else. Sometimes we've found ourselves ringing constituents and it's the only phone call they've had that day, and there's so many impacts. There's a financial impact, but of course with coronavirus, the health impact, but also mental health. And going forward, there are also concerns of TV licenses and bus passes being taken away from people who desperately need that. So that's something I would always be fighting for. And again, just going back to the manifesto that I was elected on, the Labour Party was committed to fighting for justice for WASPy women and giving back their pensions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Does anyone else want to contribute to this? Have you experiences of supporting older women?
I would just reiterate around the social isolation that some of our older service users are experiencing. We have a range of social opportunities at FWT, and a number of our partners also have a range of more informal sort of group work. And I can't speak for the partners at FWT, maybe some of our older service users may particularly be absolute regulars at some of our social group work. And obviously we haven't been able to run those over this time. So I know that myself and staff have, made a point of being in that phone contact with service users who may be older and maybe more socially isolated. But they would certainly share experiences of feeling lonely and not feeling in control of the situation. Have phone calls asking, when are you back? When are things get back to normal? What does that look like? And not necessarily being able to give them specific answers. But yeah, so that's certainly the social isolation in certainly something new. And I just wanted to say, I've just noticed in the chat that some of our partners are reiterating some of the language support services that they provide. When I was highlighting that staff at FWT are supporting service users in a multilingual way, I should have been more specific that, of course, across the partnership, our partners either have diverse staff teams and access to language support. I was thinking more within my role with FWT with service users who may be working across our staff team. So yeah, I wasn't suggesting that FWT is the only partnership that has language support. But, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. Anne or Michelle, would you want to add anything to this question?
Most of the women that we've seen come through on the referrals have all been sort of younger women or just slightly over 40. So we haven't had experience of pension age women that we've been working with recently. So.
Thanks very much, everyone. So I get another question that we've had in the Q&A function was about the role of the local universities. So I guess this can be sort of taken in two different ways. So what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the universities? So we know that many of the casual staff, many of the temporary or very junior staff in universities are women, and so they are more at risk of being made redundant or being furloughed, etc., than their senior peers. But also the role of the universities, given their importance in the economy of the region, of the city, in the recovery, I guess. So I'm thinking particularly, Zara, that this might be something that you would want to contribute.
Yes, we know the roles that Warwick and Coventry University play in the city, how they are major employers, and also they are doing a lot of work when it comes to coronavirus research. And there have been students who have gone from Coventry University to the NHS working on the front lines. But like you mentioned, there are huge concerns when it comes to staff that are being furloughed or staff that are being made redundant, and it's usually the lowest paid people on precarious contracts, 0 hours, and really like difficult terms and conditions. And one of the things that I've done is worked with Warwick UCU, Coventry UCU, the students' unions, to write to the vice chancellors, and essentially saying that staff and students need a lot more support than what they're getting, and there needs to be essentially an overhauling of university funding from top management who are paid huge salaries, and that to be spread across the workforce, ensuring that staff aren't laid off. So there shouldn't be any cuts to hours or cuts to terms and conditions, in particular staff who are on casualised contracts or fixed term, which university sector relies on heavily. And then when it comes to universities, we've seen students who have also been unable to come out of contracts when it comes to accommodation, and are really being impacted financially on that as well. So there's those issues which I've even written to ministers about, but also the university sector as a whole. While the government has brought forward funding, which isn't new money, which is a recurring theme, that there is very little new money, but things just being brought forward. It's basically a crisis because of the marketization of higher education. The model is not going to work, especially when it's so heavily also reliant on international students. And we see that with the accommodation that's being built and has been built. So there's a huge crisis from the way that it is funded, but to the way that it's also run like a business. And you see that with the salary packages that VCs have compared to the terms and conditions the lowest paid members of staff have. So this is a big fight, and I'm very close to the UCU branches and working with them to make sure that staff are being fought for, essentially.
Thank you very much, Zara. I think one last question that I would ask the panel is around the barriers and the constraints that your organizations themselves are currently facing, yeah, what would you welcome in terms of support to improve those barriers?
Can I go first up, Sarah? So for us, we would welcome some female-only accommodation in Coventry that is gender and trauma informed. So at the minute, there's a real lack of specialist female accommodation for women. And we recognise that's having an impact on the ability of our women to start and then complete a recovery journey. So we would welcome funding and appropriately supported female-only accommodation.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Faye, and do you have anything you'd like to add from the point of view of your own organization or the women that you support?
I suppose it's been difficult for everybody with COVID. We've moved our whole law centre and we're all working from home. So the barriers are obviously there for some of our clients, but we've tried to combat that by having more of an online presence, and also we've been producing information weekly for professionals and for the public on all the changes. So going forward, I mean, I normally do outreach, I normally do home visits to my families, my clients, so I'm missing that. So I'm hoping that there will be a way as we move forward that we all can carry on interacting with each other, so people can actually have face-to-face interactions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. Faye?
So also in my role, you know, normally I'd be out and about most of the time, lots of outreach, some home visits, certainly seeing women face-to-face, supporting small group work, and you know, I know our Chief Exec Christine obviously had to look at quickly moving the whole team remotely to working remotely, and then, you know, in a way there may be more challenges in considering how to safely reintroduce everything back to the way it was. And specifically, you know, we have external providers that come and deliver for us, so we have lots of learning provision at FWT, and we have providers that provide ESOL courses and, you know, accredited courses. So there's a lot to consider in how to restart everything in a safe way and engage women back into the centre in a way that they feel safe. And again, already highlighted that many of our women are BEMA women, and they're in a high risk group of contracting COVID-19. So there's huge considerations in how to re-engage a fully functioning centre and effectively. But, you know, I think the flexibility that I've seen from working at FGT, but also from across the partnership, has been fantastic. Like, I haven't not been able to find the support that women's needed across the partnership. Everyone has still gone above and beyond and has been as creative and solution focused as possible. Everything's been quite timely still. It's been amazing. Like, there needs to be, you know, a lot of self-credit of how much has still been able to be achieved. But I do have a concern that some women were maybe particularly hard to engage with, but we did have some engagement with them, and then that engagement has been lost during this time through a lack of face-to-face work, through a lack of not being able to physically come through the door and ask to speak to someone, you know, when that woman is able to come through the door. And, you know, I do have some concerns about there needs to be some re-engagement work and some time back in communities to build that trust back up. So there may be some sort of time lost there. Yeah.
Michelle, do you have anything to add in terms of the particular barriers, challenges?
I think just similar to what Faye and Anne have alluded to, we have been remote working for a while and trying to re-engage doing face-to-face work, but obviously following the restrictions that are in place at the minute.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you very much to all our panelists today. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you for this very important sharing of the experiences of the women that you're supporting. Thank you very much, Zara, also for sharing the caseload that you're currently dealing with. And thanks very much, Anna, for presenting the findings of the report. So everything, all our reports and this one as well are on our website, wbg.org.uk. Just a quick plug to let people know that we are about to report on our Commission for a Gender Equal Economy, which we hope will bring some positive alternative policies that could be implemented to lead us onto a path of recovery that is not just going back to the old normal, but to a better and more gender equal society. So that is due to be reported in September. So look out for that. And if you want more information about the Coventry Women's Partnership, please, Faye, where can we find more information?
So through the chat, Christine's posted a link to an overview of Coventry Women's Partnership on our FWT page, and also our partners will have linked to a project overview on their pages as well.
Brilliant. We will be sending some of these links to the participants in an email after the event. So if you want to have access, you will have all of them collated in one place. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for attending and for sticking to the end. And yes, have a lovely evening, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.